So we're going to get into the 5 canons of rhetoric. Like I said, this is how we're going to structure a lot of this course. What I'm teaching you today is really the process, tried and true method from beginning to end of how to craft and deliver your speeches. This is a very old tradition. It has a long history. There are a lot of people who have written books and lots of things about it. And basically what it's going to do is help you figure out where am I at now and where am I going when I'm getting my speech ready to go. So you're going to want to take some good notes, and you're going to want to ask some questions if you have them, and we'll go from there. So when you hear the word canon, those of you who read the handout for today, you probably saw that most of the students, when I ask what you hear when you hear the word canon, you think of an instrument of war. You think of people firing off a cannon at opposing troops, right? That's not at all what we're talking about. What we're talking about is more of like a literary canon, or a canon of ideas. That's canon with one N. This one is canon with two N's. And a canon is basically something that a lot of people have studied for a long time. They've passed down from generation to generation. They think of it as kind of sacred. And so this canon comes back about 2,500 years, and it's here to help you work through your speech. So the 5 different parts you're going to have to know really well. You're going to have to know these 5 parts, not just what they are, but you also need to know that they go in a particular order. And the reason for that is, again, to think of the 5 canons not just as things that are important, but also as a process of crafting your speech. So we'll spend a little bit more time on each canon. I've devoted about the next 2 weeks of your lab sections to studying each canon in more detail. The first canon here is invention, and that's just kind of your basic, I don't know what I'm talking about yet, and I want to figure out what I'm going to be talking about. So it's the really early stages. It's coming up with ideas. If you think of an inventor, you probably think of a light bulb going off. You probably think of ideas that they're creating. They want to bring something new to the world. And you should think of all of your speeches as trying to teach your audience something they don't already know. My guess is a lot of you have sat through meetings or lectures or something where somebody has taught you something and you walked out of there and you're like, I didn't learn a single thing. That was such a waste of my time. I don't want this to be the way that your classes run. I don't want this to be the way that your audiences walk away when you talk. I want you to be thinking already in terms of that first speech. A lot of you are going to be giving an informative speech with a visual aid. You can probably think of some topics that most of the people in your lab section or most of the people in this room and lecture already know. What I want you to try to do is to try and think of what's something new that I could teach my audience. What's something unique about me, unique about my experiences, unique about my interests that maybe people don't know a whole lot about. What can I teach them? You could probably come up with a list of, let's say if everyone in this room came up with a list of 5 topics for a speech, we'd probably have a lot of the same topics. My guess is hockey would be on there, right? My guess would be how to survive in cold weather would be on there. My guess is something about your generation or technology would be on there, right? We can think of the common topics that everyone would talk about. I once taught a class that was designed specifically for petroleum engineers. These are the people who basically are out on oil fields or working with executives from oil companies. And in my class, about half the people in the class wanted to talk to me about hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, right? About half the people got up and gave their speeches, and after the third one, everyone in the audience was like, oh, really? And there were probably about 15 speeches on hydraulic fracturing in my class. So I'm not saying that you're going to come up with the best topic in the world or that you're going to come up with something totally unique to you, but I want you to try for that. With 38 of you, there's probably going to be a little bit of repetition in the class, and that's okay. But I really want to encourage you to exercise your creativity. The second canon, once you've come up with your topic, once you've narrowed that topic down a little bit, you have to think about how you're going to present that topic, and more specifically, what order you're going to present that topic in. Most of the time, when you talk about a topic, you have topics and you have subtopics. And you have to think about, okay, if I have 3 different subtopics in a 6-minute speech, what order do I want to present them in? How long do I want to talk about each one of them for? How am I going to move from point A to point B to point C? This all has to do with getting those ideas in the right order, arrangement. The third strategy, the third canon of rhetoric that we have is called style. And style is basically how you make the speech unique to you. Most of the time we make the speech unique to us through our language use. We decide how formal we want to be. We decide if we want to try and be funny, and most of the time when we try to be funny, we're not actually all that funny. We decide if we want to be welcoming or if we want to be accusatory. Most of those decisions take place through our language choices. So you start off with the topic more generally, you start arranging your ideas, you figure out which idea goes where, and then you try to make it sound like you, or you try to make it sound like what you think your audience wants to hear. So you decide, maybe I want to throw in some figures of speech. These first three canons I like to think of as the written canons. That is the process of writing your speech. So you're going to write your speech, you're going to get together, you're going to try and figure out those ideas, and then the next two canons are moving that written speech into the process of getting to present it in class. So the fourth canon of rhetoric is what we call memory. And memory has everything to do with the process that you go through when you sit there with that written version of your speech and you practice it and you read it over and over again, or you don't practice it and everybody in your audience probably knows that you wrote it last night and you're panicked, right? Memory has everything to do with how much time you allow yourself to not necessarily memorize your speech. We're going to get into that in a minute or two. I don't expect you to memorize your speeches for this class. But it's the process that you undergo when you're getting ready for delivery day. There's usually, if you're smart, if you've planned ahead, usually some time between when you've crafted the final written version of your speech and when you actually have to give that speech. And then the last canon that we have is what we call delivery. Delivery is probably the one that most people in this class are familiar with. Usually when I ask my students what this class is about on the first day of class, what should I teach you in a public speaking class? Most students will come up with things related to delivery. Delivery is the process of actually giving your speech on speech day. So where and when are you going to be giving your speech, and how do you go about doing that? How do you use your verbal skills, so your tone of voice, your inflections, things like that? How do you use your nonverbal skills, your posture, your hand gestures, things like that? You can see here that this is a process from start to finish. A lot of early speechwriters, a lot of well-seasoned speechwriters will try to do more than one of these at once. A lot of them will try to do them if they're really nervous and they're really procrastinating in less than 24 hours. I'm giving you these today so that you don't do that. I'm giving you these today so that you take time with each of these canons. You do each one as one step in the process, and you recognize that the whole thing is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take work from beginning to end. Does anybody happen to know which week of this class your first speech happens? It's around week 7. It's around midterms. I'm giving you a lot of time to prep that speech. You have almost half the semester to prep that speech, but caveat that goes with that is you have 2 other speeches to give between then and finals. So this is the process that's going to help you all 3 of those times. And this is the process that's going to get you ready to go. So if you're ready, let's go into each individual canon. I'll tell you a little bit more about each one, if this will let me. There we go. So in terms of invention, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what's my purpose here? What do I hope to get across to my audience when I give this speech? Why am I doing this? Is it because someone else is making me do it? Because I want to give a speech? Because some event happened out there in our country and I'm really upset about it and I feel like I have to speak? Your purpose is going to shape a lot of how you craft your speech and how you design it. And so you want to start off by thinking, okay, what do I hope to accomplish? If I were sitting in my own audience, we're going to talk in a couple weeks about audience analysis. If I were sitting in my own audience, what would I want to take away from this speech? What would I feel like were the most important things? And that's going to help you narrow down what it is that you're actually talking about. When we do invention, it's really important that we try not to cut off any ideas. A lot of you have probably done some brainstorming exercises in other classes, and what usually happens is you try to write and you worry about being judged. You try to write and you think, oh, that idea is stupid. You try to write and nothing comes out. I'm going to encourage you all to actually take some time with invention. In fact, this whole week, you're going to be talking in lab specifically about invention. I think invention is one of the harder of the 5 canons for a lot of people. It's that process of getting started, and you're working on that midterm paper, and you're sitting there in front of a blank screen, and you write a sentence, and then you erase the sentence, and then you write the sentence, and then your PowerPoint goes blank because you clicked on it too many times, right? You try to craft your ideas. You need to give yourself some time in order to think through what are my ideas and what do I want to do with them. The second thing that's hard for a lot of students is to figure out how much information should I include. All of you, when you give your actual formal graded speeches for this course, they're going to have time limits. You're going to have time limits. Those time limits might be 4 to 6 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes. And when you write your speech, you need to practice it well to be within those time limits. And the reason for that is a lot of audiences will consider you rude. A lot of audiences will tune out. A lot of audiences will actually take the opposite message if you go under time or if you go over time. To give you an example, when I give a lecture in this class, I'm allotted 50 minutes. If I come here and I call all of you here and I let you go, right now it's 2:15. If I were to let you go at 2:15, a lot of you would wonder, why did I even bother to come all the way across campus, come to lecture, and to sit there for 15 minutes? That was a waste of my time. I was supposed to get a full lesson. I didn't get a lesson. If I go until 2:50 and 1 second, I get death glares. I get people throwing things at me saying, "Server, you talk too long, shut up," right? So I'm going to encourage all of you to take that seriously. It's really easy to kind of think, oh, well, you know, I had 5 to 7 minutes. If I go 8 or 9, nobody's really going to care all that much. I'm telling you they will. So you have to be able to narrow down your topic. You have to be able to focus your topic. Some of you are going to have really broad topics, and it's going to be hard for you to think of those subtopics. But maybe the speech isn't about the broad topic. It's about one of those smaller things. And you get into a little bit more detail with it. Maybe in another setting, you get to speak for a little bit longer. You get to show your expertise. And you can actually have some fun and play around and talk for a little bit longer. Another part that goes with invention is, especially if I'm giving a persuasive speech, what kinds of evidence do I need to support my argument? If you're persuading your audience, that means that by definition, there is one idea, and there's usually at least one, if not many, other ideas on other sides. And you want to persuade your audience to come over to your side. Well, there's going to be counter evidence trying to pull them away from you. So you want to think through what kinds of evidence, what kinds of reasoning are there that I can use to help make my case that I want to be persuasive. You're going to have an evidence and reasoning handout that's actually available on Blackboard already. That's going to give you ideas of some places where you can look to try and find that evidence that you need in order to make your persuasive case. But it's not enough to just find evidence. We also have to be able to evaluate it. We have to figure out what constitutes good evidence. And so you want to make sure that you're really sitting with that and taking the time with it, and to think through, if I'm a critical or a hostile audience member, what would be persuasive to me? Most of what we're going to be talking about in here, and most of what will determine whether your speech is effective, has to do with how you can best reach your audience. So if you're trying to write the speech because you want to write the speech and you have your own ideas in your head, it's going to be a very one-way kind of interaction. That's what's going to be really nerve-wracking for you. If you try to give your speech and it's a one-way transaction from you to the audience, they might not get what you want to get out of it. What you need to be doing is to picture members of your audience sitting there listening to you, and to try and do some audience analysis of, if I were them, what would I want to hear and how would that work? Some of you might decide that you want to include technology into your speech. Your first speech actually requires you to use a little bit of technology. So you want to think through, okay, maybe I don't learn very well from PowerPoint, so I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. Or maybe I have a video that I want to use, but I don't know how to incorporate it into my speech. Or maybe I have another kind of visual aid. These are all things that go along with invention. Probably the most important part of invention, probably the hardest part of invention, is figuring out what doesn't belong in your speech. I finished writing a dissertation about 1.5 years ago. So I wrote a 200-page document that I'm trying to turn into a book. I'll tell you right now, the hardest part of writing those 200 pages was I had a lot more to say, and it didn't quite make sense with the arguments that I was trying to make. And so some of those things I'm saving for later projects. Some of those things I'm not doing right now. I'll tell you, a lot of you probably spoke for a minute or two in your classes this week, and that might have, in the first week of class, felt like a really long time to get up and speak to an audience. I'll tell you that 5 to 7 minutes, when it's your own writing and you've practiced with it and you get to rehearse it, it's going to go by really, really quickly. And so you're going to want to make sure that you have some time to think through, okay, here's what I want to say, and here's what I should say, and maybe here's some of what I can't or shouldn't say. Does that make sense? Getting a couple head nods. All right. So that's all the first beginning stages. It's just kind of figuring out what are my ideas and how do I play with those ideas. From there, what we have are your own ideas and ideas that you want to supplement. Again, I want to remind you that a lot of what we're doing in this class is trying to teach your audience something that they don't already know, trying to teach them something new. So you probably have some of your own personal knowledge, you probably have some of your own expertise, you probably have some of your own experiences. Your audience might find those things really interesting. There are some cases where it's okay to talk about that. For instance, if you studied abroad and maybe people haven't been to Spain, you could talk about your experiences going to Spain. If you belong to a particular demographic group and you find yourself in the minority and you want to talk about that and try to teach other people what it means to be Muslim, teach other people what it means to be an immigrant, teach people what it means to be a Mormon, whatever it may be, that's another thing that you can do. Personal experience can be really helpful. And we're going to talk next week, you're going to learn about the rhetorical situation. One of the terms you're going to learn about is exigence. An exigence is basically your reason behind giving your speech. It's kind of like the question before the answer that you're giving in your speech. Your exigence can be a personal exigence. I have this personal experience. I have this personal history. I want to get my idea across. But for most of your speeches, you're probably going to have to do a little bit more than that. Where you're going to have to look is say, am I really an expert on this topic? Could I really get up here, and if I wrote a book or if I gave a lecture, would people really take me all that seriously? Some of you might be in that place. My guess is most of you at 19 or 20 or 21 years old probably are not experts in the things that you're talking about. You probably know a little bit about that. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to seek out the people who are experts in those things, or the statistics that you need to back up your case. So I'm going to encourage you to find published information. And a lot of you, when you think of published information, your first answer is probably going to be to go to your computer, type in Google, type in your topic, and find the first 3 things that come up and use them in your speech. I'm going to remind you again that your purpose here is to teach your audience things that they don't already know, things that they want to learn, things that they're going to remember, things that are unique about your topic that maybe they walk out of there and they're like, I knew nothing about chemistry before I walked into this speech, and now I might want to pursue a career in it. Who knows? So there's a couple different places where you can go to gather that information. If you make it through 4 years at this university and you don't set foot in this building, I'm going to consider that a personal failure on my part. I'm going to, more than that, consider it a personal failure on your part. Does anybody know what this building is? Chesterford's Library. We have lots of librarians there. I know that a lot of people don't think they need librarians anymore. Librarians are actually really cool. They're really helpful people. I'm friends with a lot of them. They know a lot more than you think they know. They are more helpful than you think they will be. And if you go to a librarian and say, I'm thinking about giving a speech on this topic, do you have any resources that are available for me? They're going to be your best resource. Part of why I consider it a personal failure if you never set foot in the library here is that if you don't make it to the library, there's a lot of information that lives there that you have access to while you're paying tuition here at the University of North Dakota that you will not have access to as soon as you set foot out of these doors with your diploma. So I want to make sure that you all get a chance to talk to a librarian or at least interact with the library. A lot of what the library does is also digital. So I have here listed one of the databases for if you're doing a presentation in a communication class. There is a specific database for all of communication studies that is called Com Abstracts. And you can search through Com Abstracts and it'll pull up the latest scholarship in communication about your topic. There are subject guides like this from all over the place. You could, if you wanted to, go to Google and type in your topic into Google Scholar and see what comes up. But if you type it into Google Scholar and you try to find it there, chances are you're going to get stuck behind a paywall. You're going to end up paying maybe 40 or 50 bucks for an article that you haven't read that may or may not be useful to your topic. that the library probably has access to somewhere, or if they don't have access to it, they have access to something similar to it. You also have lots of periodicals at your disposal. You can go to newspapers. So I pulled up the New York Times here, but certainly the Grand Forks Herald or any of the Fargo or other newspapers in the area. You can pull up newspapers and find some information from that. Whatever you do, I'm going to encourage you in all of your speeches to go beyond that personal experience, that personal exigence, and try to find a public exigence. Again, thinking always, what is my audience going to take away from this? And I want you to try and give it to them. Once you find some good sources, I want you to put them on note cards. Put quotations on note cards with the page numbers. It'll help you figure out how to get that information across to members of your audience. Make sense? Cool. We're going to move on then to the second canon, which is arrangement. And when I talk about arrangement, there's usually two categories of people, right? There are people on the top who have everything in little color-coded binders and are super organized, and they can find everything you're looking for, and everything's clean and sanitary all the time. Or there are the people on the bottom who really hate organization. They know where things are. If you try to clean their room, they get mad at you because they knew that it was on the floor in the third pile near the bottom somewhere, right? Some of you fall into this category. Some of you kind of see yourself as a little bit of both. If you go into my office, I look like this. If you ask my wife, I look like that, right? What is important about arrangement is that you learn, even if you're more like this, how to become more like that. Not necessarily all the time, but for your own sake and for your own sanity. When you're talking for 7 or 8 minutes, you're going to lose track of what you're talking about if you don't have a good system together to arrange it. So what you're going to ask yourself with arrangement are, how do all my ideas fit together? And if I have 2 or 3 subtopics, what order do I present them in? Do I go for A, B, C, or maybe I switch them around? I actually joke that when I do arrangement, even with long papers that I've written, like 25-page papers that I've written, I will physically cut up my paper after I've written it, take a broom in my house, and lay out paragraph by paragraph, moving them around on the floor. That's a strategy that I had to learn when I was more like this in order to become more like that. You'll come up with your own strategies, but you got to figure out the first time you write something, if you write it into a document, you're going to feel like it's just all over the page, and you feel like it makes sense until you read it back to yourself and you find out it doesn't really make all that much sense. So you want to make sure that you find a structure that works for you. When you're doing that, you also want to think, how much time do I have to give to each topic? You probably want your ideas to be pretty balanced. If you have a 7 or 8 minute speech and you spend 5 minutes talking about one idea and then throw the other 2 in right before your conclusion, your audience is going to wonder why you even bothered to talk about them at all. So you want to think about how much detail do you need here. Does your audience need any background information? If I'm a personal expert in a topic, I probably know a lot about it. If I've done some research in a topic, I probably know a lot about it. If I'm sitting in your audience listening to you, I probably don't know that much about it, so you're going to have to tell me. Most of the time, audiences need some kind of background information or context, and they need that information pretty early on in their speech in order to make it work. You also want to think about your transitions from one point to the next point. Maybe the ideas make sense, but unless you tell your audience that you're moving from point A to point B, they're going to be totally lost and taken aback and caught off guard when you actually do. Last but not least, you're going to have to learn how to introduce and conclude your messages. A lot of people really hate writing introductions and conclusions. We'll talk a little bit more about this next week. I'm going to give you some more strategies for how to do this more effectively, but that framework is really important, so I want you to spend some time with it. We'll move on to our third canon here then. Our third canon is style. And style, when we talk about it, a lot of people will think, oh, that's like art and different painting styles. No, that's not what we're talking about. Or they might think fashion. Maybe we have some fashion magazines and we're looking for what's the best dress to wear. Nope, not what we're talking about here. Certainly not talking about Gangnam Style. I know that reference is a little bit old now. We might be talking about Strunk and White and kind of linguistic style, but style is actually a lot more than that. Style, like I said, has to do with how you make the speech creative for yourself. how you express yourself, and most of the time how you express yourself through language. How do I get my message across in a way that speaks to my personality and my character, but also makes sense to my audience and fits well with them? How formal do I want to be with my language choices? Some of you have probably read some really dense philosophy with like 45-word sentences that drone on and you're kind of confused as to what they're talking about. Some of you have also seen internet comment sections. My guess is you probably don't want your speech to look like either one of those. If it looks too much like the formal philosophy, your audience is going to sit there, they're going to be confused and lost. If it sounds like an internet comment section, it's choppy and it's got a whole bunch of shorthand like a lol in it, it's probably not going to resonate all that well with your audience, right? So you have to think through, how formal do I want my language choices to be? Are there any kinds of standards of decorum or civility that might exist out there for the kind of speech that I'm giving? If I'm giving a speech on a controversial topic, how do I say my point and get my message across without offending people in the audience? Or maybe it's actually the case that I want to offend people in my audience, that I want to challenge the status quo. I don't like the way things are and people are being too North Dakota nice about it, and I have to challenge that. That's another thing that goes into style, how you express yourself, what kinds of things you try to fit into and what kinds of things you try to resist. How specific you want your language to be. Have any of you worked with a thesaurus close at hand before when you've written a paper? A lot of people probably don't have the hard copy book anymore, but you might type Shift F7 into your word processor and see what synonyms pop up, right? We want to think about how specific our language choices are. One of the key points of rhetoric is that our language choices actually really matter significantly for how we express our messages. So how clear we are, how specific we are, how creative we are all elements of style. And also, you've probably heard some really famous linguistic figures of speech. Ask not what your country can do, ask what you can do for your country is a famous figure of speech. You've probably dealt with alliteration or simile and metaphor or other things. There's a whole long list of them that you can have access to. How do you sound like that? There are actually people who have written books on those figures of speech. As boring as they are, they have really long names like antimetaboly and polysyndeton. These things have actual names and you can look them up and then you can practice working with them if that's something that appeals to you. And if that sounds really, really boring, you can choose my style is not to use any of those figures of speech, and that's okay too. So we've gotten through the written canons. Now, how do we translate those written canons into our actual speech? Well, a lot of that has to do with the fourth canon, which is memory. The fourth canon asks what kind of delivery style or what kind of mode of delivery is expected of me. We're going to talk about 4 possible modes that you could use to deliver your speech. I mentioned in here that I don't want and I don't expect you to memorize your speeches for this class. In fact, your instructors in lab don't want that either. There's 4 common types of memory. There's 4 common practices that people use to figure out how they translate the words on the page that they've written or the words on the page that they had to learn for a play to how do I give that speech to my audience. The first one here is impromptu speaking. My students in my honors class got some practice with this. Impromptu speaking basically means that you're given a prompt, you're given little or no time to prepare it, and you just kind of have to go off the cuff. You just kind of have to be spontaneous and say whatever the heck comes to mind. In impromptu speaking, one of the benefits is that you don't have to do a whole lot of preparation. It works really well for short speeches. If I throw a question out there and I expect you to answer that question, one of you could raise your hand and say maybe 30 seconds worth of material that's kind of impromptu, just working from your brain and going through that. If you try to do that with a 5 or 7 minute speech, it's not going to go over so well. So that's one of the drawbacks of impromptu speaking. The mode that we're going to focus on in here is called extemporaneous speaking. And extemporaneous speaking is basically that you've done quite a bit of preparation. Most of the time it means that you've written out the whole speech, you've gone through the first 3 canons, and you've written out an outline that is beginning to end your entire speech. If you could deliver it and say it exactly how you wanted to say it, then that's what it would look like on paper. And then the process is figuring out how to get that as close as possible into speaking without actually sitting there and reading it very rigidly in very monotone voice and never speaking to your audience. I want you to get practice learning how to translate from the written page to a couple of keyword note cards. So you saw, if you read the syllabus in the welcome packet, for all of your major graded speeches, you're going to be expected to turn in a full sentence preparation outline. That's that beginning to end ideal version of your speech. And you're going to turn in what you actually use when you give your speech on speech day, which is a couple of note cards or maybe a sheet of paper with some keywords written on it. We're going to talk more about that process from moving from A to B. The main advantage of extemporaneous speaking is that it is tried and tested as the most effective and efficient method for both speakers and audiences to get their points across. So we're going to get some practice with that. The other two modes of speaking that you could have are the manuscript speech, and that is if you took your preparation outline and read it to your audience. But if you're going to sit there and read it word for word in a very monotone voice, members of your audience are probably going to think, well, why didn't you just give this to me as an essay? I can read your essay, right? Do I need you to give it as a speech? So that's the main drawback of a manuscript speech, is for a lot of people, that delivery, that part of speaking that makes it exciting for the members of the audience, part of it that's really where the speaker gets to be creative and use their verbal and nonverbal expression to highlight and underscore their messages, that all gets lost in manuscript speaking. The fourth possible mode of delivery that you could have is to memorize your speeches. Some of you have probably had to memorize passages out of Shakespeare or passages out of other texts in your life. And you've probably sat there and rehearsed them for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and you get part of the way through it and you get stuck. And you say, if you're an actor, line, and if you're lucky, someone gives you the line, and most of the time you're not lucky and you're just expected to memorize it. I don't want you to have to worry about giving a memorized speech in this class, because a lot of you would get maybe 1 or 2 minutes in, you'd forget the rest of it, and you'd be stuck. So we're really going to highlight that second one here, that extemporaneous speaking. That one does work very well. It is a tried and true method. It's been tested. It's been studied. A lot of people say this is the type of speaking that most audiences expect and most audiences do well with. It's the kind of speaking that I'm going to give you when I'm in lecture. You'll see here I don't have everything written out word for word on my PowerPoint because I know that that doesn't work very well. I have some keywords to jog my memory, and I'm going off those keywords and I'm doing what I can. So you'll probably get some practice working through all 4 of those. But regardless of which type you use, you have to figure out, how am I going to remember what it is that I'm saying next? If you watched my welcome message last week, you probably know that I have a long history of suffering from communication apprehension or speech anxiety or stage fright. Part of how I overcame that was to figure out a system that worked for me. I have no idea why that happened. Sorry. Try to work out a system for me for outlining in a way that made sense. So for me, it was not just practicing a whole lot, but it was making an outline where I had different colored highlighters for each thing that I wanted to make sure I remembered, and reminding myself where to go if I lost my place. You're going to have to figure that out regardless of which of these styles that you use. You should talk to your lab instructor about some strategies for how to do memory well so that you don't get too lost in the shuffle. You also want to figure out, in terms of memory, how do you make your speech memorable for members of your audience? So some of this is where you're going to go back to the last canon of style and think through, okay, I know what I'm trying to say here, but I don't know how to get my audience to remember it. And so maybe I need to come up with a more creative way for them to remember it. For instance, I'm looking at these 4 memory and delivery styles, and I could say, okay, you might remember these if I test you on them. And I say impromptu, you might be able to come up with the other 3 in a couple of weeks when you have your midterm exam. I could also go back and say, okay, what's a way that I could help students remember this? Well, if I look at the first letter of each of those 4 words, it spells out the word mime. Manuscript, impromptu, memorized, extemporaneous. So maybe next time I give this speech, I go back and I change that so it helps you remember those 4 types, right? You want to find ways to not just remember where you're at, but also find ways to get your audience to remember what they learned from your speech. You want them to be able to go back a day or a week or a month or 5 years later and to be able to say, yeah, I remember that speech. That's where I learned X. For instance, I had a student in Texas who gave me a speech on CPR. And one of the things I remember 5 or 6 years after the student gave the speech is that the rhythm for chest compressions matches the rhythm to the song Staying Alive. Why do I remember that? Because it's clever, right? You want to find strategies like that to help your audience remember what it is that you're trying to say as well. What you really want to think about is how much do I really need to practice this speech, and what are some strategies for doing so? In self-evaluations, I've usually had students talk about what kinds of strategies they've used for practicing their speeches. A lot of students will talk about practicing in front of a mirror, or practicing in front of a roommate, or I've even suggested practicing in front of a webcam. You can record your speech a couple of different times, a couple of different ways, and figure out the best way to give that speech. You have to think through how many times you're going to do that as well. And I'm going to tell you that you're going to underestimate for a lot of your speeches how many times you actually have to practice it before you'll be ready to give it in class. For some of you, you might be able to read it once and really be ready to go. My guess is that might be true for one person in this entire room, being able to read their speech once and feeling ready to go, and then actually giving it and actually being ready to go. Some of you might practice your speech over 100 times and still not feel ready. What I'm going to encourage you to do is to practice your speech early, practice it often, and practice it in a lot of different ways. One of the other ways that I got over my own personal communication apprehension was to take my speeches a little bit less seriously. Now, what do I mean by that? I actually practiced my speech to song lyrics. I would sing my speech. Or I would practice my speech in an accent of my choice. So maybe one day I'd be British, and the other day I'd be Indian, and the other day I'd be something else. You have to find those kinds of strategies that get you to remember how you've practiced your speech and how to make sense of it. Last but not least, we have our final canon. That canon is delivery. That canon is your actual speech day. When you give your speech on speech day, there's a lot of things you have to think about. You have to think about where you're giving your speech, when you're giving your speech, who's in your audience, what kinds of self-care am I doing. You guys didn't meet on Tuesday, but I told my other lecturer that met on Tuesday, or you guys didn't meet last Monday, I told my class that met on Tuesday that a lot of students who generally pass out when they give their speeches on speech day pass out for one reason, and that reason is they lock their knees. It's really common when you're told to stand up straight and practice that students will lock their knees, and it actually messes with your system, and you can pass out doing that. I also told them that I had a student at another university who, day before their speech, maybe an hour before their speech, hit their head in the hallway because they had passed out. And I had to take care of this student. I asked her, are you okay? First of all, what happened here? Can I get you some help? And of course I got her some help. But I also asked her, okay, how are you preparing for your speech? What happened today that made you so nervous that you passed out? And you know what she said? She said it wasn't that she was so nervous that she passed out. She said to me she had been up the entire night before writing her speech and practicing it, that she got maybe an hour of sleep, that she didn't eat anything all day, and this was probably 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and she had drank a whole bunch of caffeine to try and stay awake. Now, I'm telling you all of this not to scare you. I'm telling you all of this so that you engage in the kinds of self-care practices so that you are ready to give your speech on speech day. So again, you're going to have to think, and you're going to have to work backwards, and you're going to have to figure out what works for me. You're going to have to think through the conditions under which you give your speech. I taught a summer class in Texas. It was 110 degrees every day in a room with no air conditioning. I've taught classes with construction happening outside that I had to yell over. I've had classes that I've taught where the microphone is supposed to work and the microphone doesn't work. You're going to have to figure out a lot of things in the moment to try and cope with that kind of stuff. You're also going to have to focus on how you're expressing yourself verbally, how you use your voice and your diaphragm and your inflections to get those words across in a way that resonates with your audience and keeps them awake. You're going to have to think about your nonverbal expressions as well. I can think back to a student that I also had who, when he gave his speech, was pacing angrily around the room the whole time. You don't want to do that. You definitely don't want to do that. So you're going to have to figure out, how do you control your body in ways that you never knew you had to control your body? I knew that one of the things that I wrestled with when I give speeches is I forget to breathe. It's ridiculous. It's natural. We have to breathe in order to live. And I get so excited about my ideas that I'll give you 30 or 40 of them in a row and then take a really deep breath. Right? It's exhausting. You can't do that. You have to actually strategically breathe in order to make sense of what you're trying to say. And you have to figure out, what are the kinds of bodily practices that I have to do in order to appear competent. For my student pacing around the room angrily, I said, take all that energy you have, put it in your feet, stand still, and transfer that energy into your hands. And it'll calm your voice, it'll calm your face, it'll calm everything about you. You have to get comfortable practicing your speech jogging in place, practicing your speech standing on one leg, whatever it may be that gets you to do something a little bit differently. What this class is about is trying to get you out of your comfort zone with the things that we all think we do well in speech and to try to do them even better. So we've got a couple more minutes here. I just have a couple more suggestions for you. And that is, when you're thinking about the 5 canons, I told you to think of them as a process, to think through them one step at a time. What I'm also going to tell you to do is, as you're preparing for your major speeches, I'm going to tell you to take that process and put it backwards. Start with delivery and think, okay, I'm probably realistically going to need a week to practice my speech, to do these last 2 canons. So if I need a week to practice my speech, I'm probably going to have to get through the first 3 canons by week 6 in order to give my speech in week 7. If I'm going to tweak the language of my speech, I'm probably going to have to work backwards and think through, where are my ideas going to fit. You should probably start invention on that first speech, if not now, very soon. I'm just going to ask that if you're putting things away, that's one of my big pet peeves, because it's really hard to have important things I want to say up until the last minute. So if you could just hold off for a second here. You want to take these things one step at a time. I've told you that sometimes it's really easy to try and do more than one and to think that we're good at multitasking. We are not good at multitasking when it comes to speech. So take all of these steps and treat them individually. Take all of these steps, work backwards to think how much time you need on each of them, and make sure that you give yourself enough time. If you are pretty good with delivery and you think that's not going to take you as much time, but you take a long time to come up with your topics and invention, start topic selection early, right? Whatever it is that you're good at, whatever it is that's hard for you, you're going to want to figure that out. What the 5 canons are also really useful for is figuring out, what are the things that we do really well already, and what are some of the things that we still need to work on as speakers. I'll tell you that I have things, I've been teaching speech for 7 years, I have things that I'm still working on in my own speaking to try and make it better. I have things that I've done well since I was 5 years old, and they're the things that get me through speech on really bad days. You probably have those things as well. So what I want you to do is to start thinking through, what is your strongest canon and why? What is your weakest canon and why? And what strategies do you all have to help each other out? You're going to be working through the 5 canons in lab over the next 2 weeks. So if you really struggle with arrangement, talk to people who think they're good at arrangement and figure out what works for them and see if you can learn from them. If you're really good at delivery and someone else is really nervous about delivery, figure out what you can teach them. So these are really helpful, not just for thinking through all the steps in the process, but also for doing that constant self-evaluation. Public speaking is a lifelong learning process. I'm still going to be teaching this class in many years, and I will still have things that I want to work on in many years. So it's all okay, but this is designed to help you. So I'll have you take these 5 canons. We're going to come back to them a lot over the course of the semester and see what you can do to figure out which ones you're good at, and see what you can do to work on the ones that you still struggle with.